All right, we're here, man. Another one in the summer, the wee hours or the wee weeks, whatever you call it.
Interesting topic today. We're talking about basically talking about talking, but through the lens of constructive criticism. Like we hear that a lot.
Yes.
But what are the ingredients to that being quote unquote successful?
You wrote constructive feedback, which was I prefer,
Yes.
right? Because criticism,
Yes.
I think, has, as I like to say, a pejorative connotation, right? So if I to criticize, even if it's constructive, it's still. But if I'm giving you feedback that is constructive, I think that's more positive, as I've seen you do many times. So very skilled at that.
Why is it? Why do you think it's hard?
I think it's hard to give feedback because in order to provide feedback to somebody else, I think you already have to have some idea of how to craft it, who the person is, what the relationship, and there's a lot of things as opposed to just saying something that I think you need to hear. And I think if I'm taking into the context who we are, what the reason is, what I'm trying to deliver, what result I'm trying to get, there's a bunch of rules, I wouldn't call it rules, but there's a bunch of parameters and boundaries around what's the best way to communicate this idea to this person that respects them and where their ability is at, and it also communicates what we need to. I think that's a fine line to walk, and once you find that and you build that as a skill, I think it can become pretty powerful. But it is a skill.
I'm gonna go a level below that, below or above, depending on what your view is.
We're leveling down. I like it.
The entry, the harder entry point, I think, is just we've talked about this off camera. In a digital age, I think the most effective feedback is still sitting down like we're doing and be like, hey, let's talk. And as that's being conditioned out of society with being like, oh, let me just text this person, let me shoot off an email. To me, like the most challenging conversations I've had in person allow for the most desired outcome when it comes to trajectory change. But then getting someone in the room and having the skill of being like boom, 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 while we both respect each other, getting harder and harder in 2024.
100%.
Or whenever you're listening to this. Hopefully it's 2028. If it's timeless, then it's timeless.
But I think you're starting to talk about like partially what I think preparing the person for the conversation, because in that moment, if I send it as a text, the device, the technology sort of separates us from this thing. You don't have to see my facial response, you don't have to see my body language, but that puts the onus on you to interpret it in the way that you interpret the meaning's in the eye of the reader, right?
Yep.
And the mind of the reader, right? Not, I can intend anything I want, but you're like, oh, that guy said that, like, right? And I may not have meant it how you take it, but that's neither there. But in this part, I think it's a little bit easier to tell, but it has other cons. Like, I have to be able to accept that you're saying this to me, and in person, there's nowhere to hide. We're looking at each other. I can't just like, oh, I don't have to look at your face. I don't have to survive what I'm reading on you. And so, but I think that is a necessary skill for human interaction, is that I look at you, I get something, but if I'm not right or I'm not sure, I can ask questions, I can challenge, I can do things. And the other part is about the preparation, is that you describe the context. Giving you feedback, I care about that. I think the context of relationship, the dynamic is such that we're together for a reason that's not random or happenstance. We're here for, right? And I think that's where the most power has. We're here for a reason. You have your role, I have mine.
Yeah, I think it's tough because like when I've been in previous versions of myself and when I was younger, so many authority figures would be like, hey, can I come talk to you for a sec? And I'm like, are they cool? And then boom, unloaded. I'm like, all right, cool. Like, thank you. I haven't had time to think about this. I don't know how to respond. However, like now that I'm in a position to give feedback, like, hey, can we talk about blank at this time? And also think about it a bit first, so that like, as opposed to just be like, okay, I've thought about this. I personally have thought about this for like previous authority figures, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes, 5 hours, however long. But then when you get me in the room, you expect me to have like a perfect response to it? And I'm like, I just got here. You're telling me this for the first time, and this isn't really productive. This is just you sitting down and telling me how you feel. This isn't feedback.
And I think that's what a lot of times people who have not been trained on what it means and how to do it feel like that's what it is. I'm telling you information about you, which means it's feedback, but really, I'm telling you how I feel about you. And actually, oftentimes, socially, this where you described it as, can I talk to you about this? I think oftentimes people phrase something as a question when they really don't mean it. They mean it as, I'm going to tell this to you now. So, because if I say, can I talk to you about this, can I talk about this with you now? You might say, actually, no, now's not a good time. Busy. And if they're like, okay, cool, let's schedule another time, then you know it's a question. But if they're like, oh, well, you really need to hear this, or they lean in, then I think that's very common because we don't have this idea where I want you to respect your agency. If I'm asking you a question, I should allow for the fact that you may not be ready. As you said, I've thought about this, I'm ready to go. But I talk to you and you're like, give me some time. And that also takes some skill on the side of the listener. And oftentimes, if there's a power over situation, like a younger person, a hierarchical situation, you may not feel like you can say, I'm not ready, let's talk later. You sort of say yes, you don't really mean yes. You're like, oh, what? Let's wait. And so those are all like.
And I think an alternative to that, if there is something of a power dynamic or needs to be addressed immediately, to be like, hey, I need to address. I think the rephrase would be like, all right, like, can I talk to you about this? However, I just need to tell you this right now. Think about the behavior, whatever it is, think about the behavior, think about the way you're conducting yourself. Let's circle back to it at a later time, but I need to tell you, but in this case, I need to tell you about it because this is how it's being perceived by X, Y, and Z. But I don't need a response from you right now, but I need you to know that this might be offside, or this is how it's being perceived, or this just needs to change.
And you're letting them know based on the context of the situation, if it's safety or there's been a real concern that it concerns something that, we don't have to get into, but it needs to be communicated because there's a time aspect. We can't just let whatever that is happen again because you didn't know. I have to let you know, and now you have a chance to, right? Read some stuff here. I know it's like ego is the enemy when receiving feedback. One is a leader to someone. I like that because, I think our roles, the dynamic in a hierarchical situation is contextual. Like one day you're a learner and I'm the teacher, and the other day you're a teacher and I'm the learner, and it could be the same relationship depending on context, right? And so,
So can I ask them, what's your relationship? Like, ego is the enemy is a great book by Ryan Holiday, so that's not an original idea from me. Like we're referring to our internal notes here, listeners. I just say like random things.
Thanks for full disclosure on the references. Thank you.
So, ego is the enemy is it's one of my favorite books from the last 10 years. So I think that speaks to, I think everyone's comfortable with providing feedback.
Most times I would agree, yes.
Like,
but receiving it.
Exactly. So what's your relationship with receiving feedback?
It's been a journey, because I talked about, somebody, one of my sons, I look at him now, he doesn't really like feedback, and I'm like, okay, I don't really like feedback. And I think on one hand, that's because, as we discussed, I think feedback has been given to me and modeled in a way that isn't really feedback. It's just me telling you how I feel about you and being very criticizing about the behavior, as opposed to describing it as, hey, this is a learning opportunity, I'd like to help you. It's like, don't do this. This is wrong, yada, yada, yada. And that's been programmed in over a lot of years. And so it's taken myself a lot of unlearning to now, even in the past, like 6 to 8 months. Now, I want to say something to my son, but before I would say it in a way that is really just, I'm the dad and you're the person who's supposed to listen, versus, okay, here's how I feel about something. Here's what I've asked you to do. You've agreed. This is what's going on now. I'm respecting what you're asking. This is what I'm doing. And now I'm asking you to do the same. Because I think, right? So I'm just trying to approach it in a different way. And it's still not always perfect or at all. But my relationship with feedback has, giving it and receiving it has been different. And now receiving it, I now judge, is this person capable of delivering good feedback? And then I take that with a grain of salt. Whereas before I would just hear it and then have my own narrative. Like if you said something to me, and you have, I'm like, okay, I don't have to agree or like or whatever, but the person telling it to me has thought about it, understands, and is doing their best to deliver in a way. And so I respect that just as process. And so I'm not like, because if you just show up off the cuff and say a bunch of stuff, then I'm like, well, that's hurtful and I don't like it.
You're just saying stuff.
I'm just saying the thing. I'm just saying the thing, right? What about you? What's your relationship with giving and receiving?
Hey, if we're Time out, pause. But the note, if we're pulling back a curtain, the note I left beneath that, the note's 2 bullet points below that is, I wrote bad oral communicator, good idea, versus excellent oral communicator, bad idea. Value in both. My relationship with receiving feedback is exactly that. As someone who takes a lot of pride in being a strong oral and written communicator, when someone doesn't like have good energy when they're delivering something, or like they tell me what they need to hear, but it's just like not with passion and vigor, I need to do versus I'm working on. Let's go with I'm working on.
Yes.
Doing a better job to humble myself and be like, hey, this person is doing their best in the situation because they're not as animated, for lack of a better term, as you are about this topic. Doesn't mean that like that they don't care at the same level. So that's my primary challenge right now when someone brings something to me, let's say basketball, because that's something that I'm probably most passionate about. They're like, blah, 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 blah. We watched the same game. They refer to this play. I'm like, you didn't really like articulate that with any. But then, but when I go back, I'm like, yeah, maybe at this point of the game, this person could have made a better decision. This athlete could have made a better decision in that specific situation that would have led to a different outcome. But usually that comes long after I'm working on it just being instant, but that usually comes long after we've left the room. Because in the moment I'm like, what do you mean? The ego's the enemy. We watched the same thing. Like so many things.
Yeah. Well, I think the processing time, which you sort of processing and reflection in the moment is different from later when you're like, okay, I'll walk through it. I'm like, okay, yeah.
Or I need to see it again.
Yeah.
What you refer to, because just because our memories could have been completely different. And that goes back to feedback. How we both perceive this one thing are completely different. But fortunately, with the basketball situation, most of the time, especially when I coach myself, there's films that
you got receipts.
We can look back. Man, if we're having.
But in regular life, we can't always have. We don't always have the ability to go back with actual receipts and look at it, and that's the issue is that's the skill.
Then what do we do?
Right. Well, I think you meant like having a good oral communicator. That's one skill, but it's separate from the skill of giving good feedback and also processing your own feelings while you're trying to communicate your feelings about something that someone else is doing. Because oftentimes we sort of mix feedback and criticism with the person and the action. Yep. And there's, as we've talked before off camera, there's action in person. And just because you did a thing that wasn't great, that's not reflective of who you are. Right. But there can be improvement on this thing. And I think part of giving feedback is being able to identify even those little bits. Like, I want to help you, but I don't want to make you feel as though you are inadequate because you did this thing. You are as good as you are no matter what, but this thing has some skills and things around it that we can improve. And I think that allows that externalization, as we've talked about in counseling, is it helps create construct around things. I can identify this thing as something I can work on and with, but it isn't all that I am. And I think that separation is good because that allows me to take the feedback or criticism about this and separate it from my personhood, which I think is really important.
And layering that, I think another piece of, someone could be excellent at communicating. That's one factor for me. Another factor is, for me, receiving feedback is how much do I like you? How much do I like you or respect you? If someone who we have a great relationship tells me something, I'm something I really don't want to hear. And that same information is told by someone who I have a rocky relationship with. And I'm you already know where this is going. I'm the information and what I need to hear is exactly the bleeping same. But the deliverer of that is just straight up through the lens of which I see it. So that's what I'm working on too. Can I just filter that and be okay, I don't like you as much as I like this person. Not you.
What?
But then I need to hear this. This is a blind spot. Yeah. Okay.
I think the messenger is also part of the issue too. The lens by which you see them, the relationship you have with them. The messengers is also ultimately very important, is what I'm hearing, because, like I say, same message, two different messages, even delivered as close as we could, you may not receive it from this person because you've got something going on with this person. You've got your own narrative, your own baggage here. And that is troublesome sometimes because maybe this person, you need to hear it from this person has the best perspective, but it's difficult for you, right? And I know that for myself. I can say the exact same thing. Certain people, it's difficult to receive anything from, and other people are like, okay, I hear that, I can take that. And again, I can separate that from, you don't know enough about me in this context to say something that I can tie to something else. We're like, oh, Gabe's saying that because of something that happened years ago. Now no, you're saying this is what you know, this is what it is, but it's this person over here, we've had stuff and something's happened, and now I can't separate what they're saying from these other times they've said stuff or this other thing, and it's really complex. And so I appreciate the messenger aspect being very, which leads us back to our pause, compassionate inquiry, regulation, and all those things are tied, because now, like, as you described, I really need to hear this, and it's coming from you, but I think even the articulation of that spells out that I've had some thought around this. I can actually mine what's proper, or sorry, not proper, what is useful about this information and separate that from the messenger and know that I've got bias because of the messenger. I think that speaks to a level of skill that is excellent, because we need that skill.
Yeah, it's a skill that I might have to an extent, but I think it's continuing to work on that.
Yes,
for sure. It's like, yeah, separating the action from the event, and then I think like providing the feedback to invert that is also key. To be like, hey, if I don't, I guess for messenger deliver, if I don't like this person as much as I like someone else, I still need to prepare this person for a requisite level of success. It does not mean I deliver it any differently. Like in that one moment, like once we're done the feedback portion of the conversation, we can go back to like, all right, you're my homie, you're my frenemy, whatever, to these two parties. But if the purpose of this conversation is to work on X, in this moment, I can't have that bias if I'm to be an effective communicator. I think just be like, yo, XYZ, or hello, XYZ. This is neutral. I can't lose my credibility here and let my view on you, or whatever history I have with you, or even just like what my perceptions of you are. Like this is the neutral fact. This is objective to an extent. That's what we're talking about it. Let's unpack. This is what I see. What do you see? Boom. We'll keep going. But as opposed to like, with someone you love and respect, it's like, all right, this is what I see. You automatically probably ask, what do you think? But you just want to get that conversation over with someone you don't like or don't respect as much.
Right? I think a bunch of stuff you're talking about, I actually like this from Brene Brown, this Engage feedback checklist. So I'm going to read a bunch of them. If you want to stop me, let me know. So I'm ready to sit next to you rather than across from you. I think this is part of what this creating the environment. It's just like next to you as opposed to across. Because across, I think, implies adversarialness. I'm willing to put the problem in front of us rather than between us. Right? And so, again, this externalization, we're both looking at it. It's not coming between us, but we're looking at it. I'm ready to acknowledge what you do well instead of picking apart your mistakes. And I think this is, it's funny, but I think this is a go-to for a lot. And I've also done this with my sons and things like, okay, there's lots we can be happy and grateful and
say that word again.
Sorry, I'll say it again. I'm ready to acknowledge what you do well instead of picking apart your mistakes. We typically, oftentimes, socialize or lean into judgment. You made a mistake. I'm calling it out. I'm giving feedback or constructive criticism on the mistake, as opposed to a strengths-based approach is what acknowledge what you do well. Hey, you're doing that really well. How can we improve on that? Right? As opposed to saying, you did that wrong. Here's what you need to do better. Versus, hey, great job over here. Let's see how we can improve. As an example, we're still communicating that those work need to be done, but we're now not tying it to some negative, which, I recognize your strengths and how you can use them to address your challenges. That's straightforward. I can hold you accountable without shaming or blaming. I think this one's super hard.
That needs to be at the
That should be at the top of it. things, right? But you know, to be clear, a lot of her work is around shame, and so. But this is really important because, again, as I always say, shame. So many things are wrapped in shame, and we typically, you know, do this thing around shame. It's cultural, generational. So many. We all have it. It's not like it's unique to any one group. Like shame, shame, shame. I'm open to owning my part. Because, and so how I typically articulate this is that if you cannot identify your role in any situation, then it's going to be difficult for you to take ownership. And by role, I mean not what you did right or wrong, not what you could have done better, but what was my role in this? I was here, I was talking to you, I said things, you said things, but this was my role, and not criticize it, just, right? And that's, again, externalization. How do I separate my role from me? Right? I can genuinely thank someone for their efforts rather than criticize them for their failings, right? So I think this is a teamwork, more focused thing where, you know, hey, it didn't work out, but, you know, thanks, man. You put everything into it, and that it was what it was, right? I can talk about how resolving these challenges will lead to growth and opportunity. And I think this is a more reflective piece, like, we work on something, we tried something, it didn't work as well as we like, but I think you've talked about this actually as a concept. How do I gather the information of something that I have, stewardship over? I want to know all that, and I want to use that not to pick apart and criticize people, but how can we leverage that communal and community knowledge to make the next iteration better? You describe that in many different ways, mentors, and model that. And next one, I can model the vulnerability and openness that I expect to see from you. Now, I try to do this in my classroom, but I think that is hard. But I think it also goes to setting the culture.
I think there's a degree on that one. There's a degree to that one which is professionally appropriate or not.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Not every context we can be completely 100% open and vulnerable, but sometimes we can. I'm aware of power dynamics, implicit bias, and stereotypes, as you were talking about a minute ago. I know I've got bias. I know I've got bias, but I don't want that to cloud what I'm saying. But I'm going to acknowledge that it's there. And I think that's the best position you can do, because we can't cut it out, excise it, or just pretend it doesn't exist. We all have bias. It's part of how the judgment works, and we have a judgment system that works. But if we say, hey, I know I got bias, let me just reflect on that, and then maybe I'll think critically about how I craft so as not to expose my bias, but still communicate the information.
Yeah, love all of that. So I think based on that though, let's dive back deeper into the bias piece, because I think that is the most challenging one for me. Is there a process for yourself in which you go from one instance in which you were giving or receiving feedback, self-reflect, be like, hey, like this specific part of the conversation or this specific part of the interaction, I wasn't quite happy with. And then I bounce back into the next one and improve it by 1 to 7%. You have a process for that?
The closest thing I can think of is when I'm in class and I have a group situation, and I've got to balance a couple things. One, there is a hierarchical situation. I'm the teacher, there's students. Someone says something out loud that, let's just call it, is not ideal. And so now, if I don't model a reasonable response that has has a couple things. One is that people are empowered to do more of it because they know they won't get called out. And other people will be shamed or not by it. Other people, maybe someone laughs or giggles and things about it. But so now my process, okay, somebody said something, my process to check, does this need to be talked about now or within the group or individually?
Yes.
And if I think and something needs to be group addressed, I will typically do it right away. If it's something that I think can be individual addressed, I may find a segue to do something else and then circle back. Because sometimes, even though the balance is maybe everyone needs to hear it right now, doing that may double down the shame that comes to the target. I said something, and now you're making a statement to everybody, and I was the central, and that has its own thing. So I got to judge that the best I can. And I'm getting young people from 18 to 40 something. So my process is just context, situation, where my power dynamic, making sure I'd rather less shame and the spotlight be felt on you, but you do need to hear what's going on, how that affects. And sometimes I'll actually write announcements on the board, on the announcements board in the Slack channel, so that, hey, this is what's going on. It can be directed to everyone outside an individual, and then people hear it. And sometimes, because I like accountability, if it's that important, sometimes I'll do a poll. I'll say, have you read this? Do you understand this? You must.
So that's fast for more. I think we're diverting from
we're diverting.
I think what was really cool from what I was hearing is when someone says something that's not optimal, there's a delta for you in between addressing the behavior, and then that leads to the consequences.
Should there be consequences or follow-up?
If there is follow-up, right? Because I think when you say like double down on the piece where that person needs to be, does that person, I think, would that fray the relationship between you and that person? Like, what if we were to use your word, admonish that person in front of 30, or for me in a basketball environment in front of, I guess, 2 teams, so 20 people? Can I tell this person later? But I can still have what needs to be, what that behavior is, to be like, hey, or in your situation, you can't say that here, or just even ask, like, does that contribute to what we're talking about here? But that doesn't mean I have to shame you in front of all of your peers. Because I think like we can dive deeper into that behavior individually.
If necessary, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think most of the time, I think, to me, in the environments that I'm in, it does require a follow-up. Even if it's just to be like, hey, remember when we talked about this? Just to like reinforce it a little bit. Yeah. As opposed to be like, hey, it wasn't just for me like yelling to look for optics-wise, or like saying it aloud. Like we've talked about before, I'm saying this because A, I care, and B, it'll impact you in B, C, D, E way. If there's B, C, D way. Usually there's just like
I think part of the process is knowing that these things happen. Those things happen less because I address it right at the gate. When we first meet, I set culture expectations. This is what we do here, this is how we do it, and this is the vibe. And I found that since I started doing that, those types of things where someone will say something out loud or write something out in the chat that's like, oh, cringe, much fewer and far between, because they already know the culture, what's going on. And so they have an idea about it. So I like to preemptively say this is a vulnerable and open environment, we can do what we want, but because of that, we also have to take into account that you can't just say whatever you want, and there are consequences, and you take ownership of that. I actually took a lot from that checklist and tried to inject into how I set the culture, because ownership is a big part. We got to take ownership of our words, like the brave space. That's a condensed version of some of these concepts, right? Taking ownership, making sure accountability, yada, yada, yada. So I think that the process is mostly around environment and culture setting as soon as possible, and I think that just flows later.
Yeah. As we're recording this, what is it, mid-August? Mid-August, my favorite basketball team, Los Angeles Lakers, just hired a new head coach. His name is JJ Redick. 15 to 17-year pro in the league, and has gone on to become one of the best communicators and broadcast in the broadcasting space since he retired, so over the last 3-4 years. And one of the things that he said in his introductory press conference is that I want the pursuit of excellence to not be miserable.
I think that's excellent.
So in this case, obviously, like in that situation at the highest level of athletics, there needs to be some difficult conversations like, hey, you're not playing tonight, man. Or even in a win, be like, or if there's inevitably times where you lose in basketball, like, we suck here. Like when we watch the film back, like, how was that delivery? Like, to be like, how, even if it's not admonishment, I think there's a level above that to be like, at least we're having respectful discourse between human to human. Like in a film breakdown, I'm not just saying, Rich, why did you miss your coverage here?
I don't know why I missed that shit.
But then be like, hey, at this point, 3 minutes, 49 seconds in the second quarter, this happened. Yeah, it's an objective fact. This happened. You are responsible for this. Take some ownership for it. And then we move forward. Just to identify, like, this is like we talked about addressing the behavior versus how do we administer the consequences.
I think that's, again, speaks to the concept of strength-based approach versus deficit-based, because the old school way, I guess, would be success through suffering. Suffer, like hard, grind, you have to get demolished, you got to be whipped into shape, as it were, versus success through support. Okay, this happened, that was your job. How do we get you to work on making sure that doesn't happen again? What are the skills you need to build? What are the thoughts you need to have? And I think that,
even if it doesn't happen again, next time you are in a better position and you think about that, you can do it a little bit better.
And it's not attached to a negative. It's attached to, I think, this is where I try to instill in students. I can't teach you intrinsic desire, but I can say that if I smack you down every time you make a mistake, that motivation becomes extrinsic and negative based on that I don't want shame, I don't want admonishment, so I'm going to try and avoid those things. Mm-hmm. And for some students or some people, that works. They're able to hunker down and do things that become excellent. But I think that comes at a cost. Versus if I promote this idea that, okay, you are who you are, you're all they need to be, these are skills we need to do to get you better, and if you continue to work on those, it will get better, and you're going to fail a lot along the way. You're going to fail, and that is okay. The failure is okay. I'm going to be here to support you. I'm going to be there and stay tough and hold you accountable, but I'll never shame you, and I'll never put you down. And that is a transitional change. Those one spectrum to another, trying to make it. It's hard, but
I think this goes to my final bullet point that I have prepared in our internal notes. Allowing for multiple bites of the apple when it comes to feedback. Like you said, if we don't set up the environment where it's shameful, we set it up where it's constructive, respectful, growth-based. Insert all the synonyms you want about that. And then you can come back. You can come back to it. Most of the time, we're not gonna solve. If it's something that isn't as, I'm going to put this in scare quotes here as I usually do, simple as, hey, you can't use that language here, or you stop being late. And even in those situations, there's a lot of different variables that lead to that behavior. If it's something more nuanced, be like, I don't know, what's a good example here? Basketball coaching here, that someone is consistently, if an athlete is being negative to his teammates whenever, his or her teammates whenever they make a mistake, but however, inversely, that same athlete doesn't hold him or herself to that same standard. I see that's a lot. How do I have this conversation with this athlete where we start the conversation? Because that's not going to change overnight. That goes to years and years of wiring, years and years of lived experience. But then let's start the platform using all the tools that we've talked about over this last half hour. Be like, set the environment, give the purpose a preemptive, give the person a preemptive instruction and a declaration of like, this is what we're talking about. Have the initial conversation and then be like, all right, let's revisit it in like a week, see how we're doing. 2 weeks, whatever time frame, whatever frequency that you feel is necessary. But giving it time to breathe between being like, hey, I told you this, versus you now, here's some, take it away, take some time, change at your own pace, or absorb at your own pace, digest at your own pace, and then let's talk about it again. Well, let me see how it plays out.
There's a lot of philosophy around my classroom. It's a pedagogical concept, scaffolding. I give you something, you try, you do, you fail, I give you, and then you get better. I give you lots of bites at the apple, lots of practice. And through that iterative process, you see that, every time I make mistakes, hopefully I'm getting fewer and fewer, but I'm getting to the point where, okay, I reached a level of proficiency that allows me to build on that, have more nuance around that, as opposed to being fear of not being able to be good enough. And I think that opposite view is like, I'm going to try and build until I get to the point where I can build some more. That extrinsic motivation means constant improvement. I do this because it fulfills me, not because you want or you like it, but I want this. And I think once you can get somebody else into that zone as a coach or a mentor or a teacher, I think that's when that's parent. That's excellent. Great, you go off and do that. And you talked about this time, this model that, because as the person who's giving the feedback, you also have to be aware that you are also modeling the appropriate response, allowing them to have their own agency time thing around it, and not being like it needs to happen faster or it needs to happen better. But
That's your timeline, that's not their timeline.
That's right, right? And I think that modeling part is also hard for the person giving the feedback, especially depending on the relationship. But yeah.
Yeah, like things we talked about, like I'm continually working on being more respectful and being more open to people who aren't great communicators or someone I don't like. But then I talked about it now, it's middle of August 2024, weeks, end of August 2024. I'm still not going to be great at it, but like, yet. But like,
Yet, right? I think that's an important piece, because I think the yet part,
but we progressed it.
yes, signals that there's still more to do, and that's okay, and that's good. I think,
Right.
yeah, I wish it was easier to get more people to talk like about those things as like concepts and constructs, and then they think about it, and maybe it happened a little bit better, or I thought about this, maybe I can try and get better. It's like,
Yeah, I guess anytime I think that we can, like in traditional Asian culture, I experienced and saw this a lot, like the idea of feedback equals failure equals fatal. It really stops you from trying sometimes. And don't want to go too far into this rabbit hole, but like, I think that's my thesis there. Like, feedback. This is probably how I'm gonna just wrap this up, because I don't know how many more thoughts I have after I leave y'all with this. I think like one of the foundations of feedback is to provide the person when you're providing it, the person with the courage and skills to try again without it feeling like failure's fatal. I think that's my summary.
I 100% agree. That's how I tell my students, you're here to fail a lot, often, and eventually, if you continue at it, you get up, it's going to get better, and then you'll see. And that processing time, I try to do exactly what you say. In the beginning, I say, we don't know each other. I haven't built the trust between us yet, but I'm asking you to do your best, give it a chance, and you'll see. And usually, it takes around the 3 months point where they're like, okay, I'm starting to see it. Some of them will articulate it. Others, I'll just see it in their work. I'm like, and others, they didn't buy in, so I see that too. But yes.
Yep.
Cool.
We talked about the talk.
We did the damn thing.